I mean, it was so wildlife documentary. There was even an alpha, and there was this beautiful girl. She had a knockout figure, bright pink bikini. She was the one doing the super sand moves, like you straddled in the sand. She was writhing.
She had just cut out Sports Illustrated as the middleman.
She really had. And it was actually she who got us thinking about what I believe is an as yet uncoined term for this ritual. Private act done in public for a virtual audience. And we thought, so a couple of months ago, I was hiking with my best friend from high school, and we were in Madeira, which I've never known really where it was, and I still didn't when we were there. So I Googled it this morning. It's 700 k's west of Morocco. So it's a Portuguese island, but it's literally in the middle of the Atlantic and, well, not the middle, the north, and it's really, really far from land.
It's funny because I feel like I learn something new every day. I knew the outline, the sketch of where Madeira was, but thank you for filling in those details.
Well, hopefully I've remembered it right. So otherwise I'm misinforming in the first minute. So we were there. It was quite rainy at the time that we went. We actually spent a lot of the time just walking around in the rain and then occasionally emerging from mountaintops into more cloud. So we started sticking more to the coast, and the coast is utterly gorgeous. You find yourself on this black volcanic beach. There's lush forest-covered cliffs and mountains just spilling into the ocean. We were on this beach called Seychelles. And then, miracle of all miracles, a horizontal rainbow forms over the ocean.
Like one of those you rarely see types of rainbows.
Well, I mean, it must just be the way the arc works, but it was sitting so low over the ocean, you had this exquisite view of everything. But the strange thing was we also had this really, really, really absorbing spectacle below us because we were on the hill looking down. And then this volcanic beach, it was like watching a nature documentary because it must have been some sort of influencer's paradise because it had been sort of divided informally into territories, which each had a team of influencers. So the influencer and her team, usually of one or two people, but sometimes on her own, shooting against this backdrop of all the mountains. And we watched it. I don't know how long we watched it for, a really, really long time. And it was just this ritualized skipping towards the camera, doing a twirl, the hair, then going to the camera, reviewing the footage, fixing the clothing, fixing the hair, going back, doing the twirl, trailing your fingers in the sand. It was like a ritual. It was amazing. And we were kind of absorbed by it. Like it's quite hard to take your eyes off.
It's almost hypnotic in a way. Almost sounds like a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, possibly.
Funny you should say that because there was one alpha. I mean, it was so wildlife documentary. There was even an alpha, and there was this beautiful girl. She had a knockout figure, bright pink bikini. She was the one doing the super sand moves, like you straddled in the sand. Think Sports Illustrated, straddled in the sand, flung back, sort of. She was writhing in the sand.
She had just cut out Sports Illustrated as the middleman.
She really had. She really had. And it was actually she who got us thinking about what I believe is an as yet uncoined term for this ritual. Private act done in public for a virtual audience. And we thought, this is public instabilation.
It elicits something titillating, the term.
Well, I mean,
no,
it's a bit sexual.
Well, it's sexual, but it's also something that you're sort of suggesting should be done in private. That it's almost like they're so absorbed in that act that they're no longer in the moment or the environment, right? Or observing it.
Well, funny you should say that because none of them saw the rainbow. We were standing looking down and the rainbow's off to the left. And we were thinking, surely at some point someone's going to look up and see the rainbow. They all missed it. I am going to try to have this conversation today without sounding super judgy, which has got its challenges. Because I think every generation kind of freaks out about what the next generation's doing to completely derail everything, and that's just part of getting old.
Yeah, like you see the end of the world approaching.
Yeah, via the young people, the youth of today. There's something about age where suddenly you find yourself using phrases like, have you ever said in my day?
Back when I was your age.
Yeah, I'm using a lot of when I was your age. My younger daughter actually thinks that there's such a thing as the newen days because she's constantly saying, Mum, why are you talking about the olden days again? In the newen days is different.
How did she come up with that?
I don't think she knows that she came up with it. I think she thinks it's part of the English language. So I know we do have this slight glitch in our collective personalities, but I want to discuss today selfies from a slightly different angle. See what I've done there?
Wow, I'm impressed with that wordplay.
Yeah, well, go self. But I think there's a new phenomenon that we haven't really named yet.
So it sounds like your question has more to do with this being a generational difference. And what I also hear you saying was this idea that they were missing out on this incredible experience.
Yes, I thought about the generational side of it later because I was like, man, I'm being so judgmental. And, you know, if you're a kid who's grown up having everything that you do captured on camera, which lots of kids today do, then maybe that's just not such a great leap. But part of the question is about generational, but also I'm interested in whether or not there is any work done on, you know, they say that the era of social media has actually increased a lot of what we recognize as narcissistic traits in humans.
Well, interestingly, a study came out a while ago, kind of looked at what, you know, even young children sort of aspire to when they get older. And one of the main responses was like being famous, which was apparently a big difference from, you know, many years prior. And this idea that actually fame is maybe within your grasp on a micro level, just like many other things that the internet might have democratized a little bit, like maybe everybody has the opportunity to go viral, or, you know, it's something that started to permeate through. They may even see, like, for example, I have family members, these nieces of mine who are definitely not in my generation, I'm sure look at me like a dinosaur, but they routinely develop content. And then they talk with each other about, oh, you know, so-and-so went viral, so-and-so had this many likes, and so-and-so, right? So it's just almost like a different level of, it's like a currency or a status symbol. Whereas I think for me, that would be very distasteful. It's almost like being a braggadocio, right? It's like, look at me, selfies and broadcasting yourself online. I would just feel so embarrassed and self-conscious if I was doing that. And I think that was much more commonplace of a feeling, right? But I never saw myself online before it started to become much more prominent with the social media aspect. I mean, when was the last time that you even saw yourself in a picture if you weren't looking at a photo album until Facebook rolled around, basically?
What about this human thing? You know, I've got the perfect view here. It's incredible, but it's a background because I'm not in it yet. Yeah. So every view can be improved by me being in it. That's not a recent thing though, is it? People have been putting their finger on top of the Taj Mahal and...
Well, interesting that you say that, because Walter, my husband, said something which was kind of notable. We were walking around during Fallas, which is this big festival here in Spain, in Valencia. And there's these incredible structures that they build, right, that are several tens of meters tall and things.
And they're like public art.
They're public art in the middle of these plazas. They're eventually burned down. It's very interesting. Anyway, his take on it was, why are we taking pictures of these fallas without us in the picture? Because otherwise, it might as well just be that you're looking at a website full of pictures of fallas on the internet. Like it's kind of marks in time and place that you were somewhere. For him, it seemed to be more important.
Or to take the counter view, I've got a friend who you'll be traveling together and you're like, oh, how come you're not taking any photos? And she's like, it's fine, I can just download them from the internet later. Which I almost think that's a more evolved way to travel. It's like, am I really going to take a better photo than someone has already taken somewhere? And unless I think that photo can be improved by having me in it, probably just download it. So, getting back to the original question, we often refer disparagingly to narcissistic traits, or we'll say, oh, that person's so narcissistic. But I don't really know if we understand what we're saying. So if we're looking at someone on the beach who's obsessed with their footage to the expense of everything else, is that narcissism or is that something else?
Well, I would argue that it could be something else, in part because it's hard to know why they're doing it, number one. So if that person basically says, I'm very special, I'm very beautiful, and therefore I need images taken of me, then that tends to be a little bit more in the narcissistic vein. If it's, say, this is your social currency at school, and you don't exist without an Instagram account or posting once a day that your friends can then sort of comment on. I'm not saying it's a beneficial thing, and it probably encourages a certain amount of kind of narcissistic traits more broadly. But there may be a good reason to do it that has nothing to do with the person's psychology per se. Maybe more socially determined. But I think it's something that might merit a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of sort of societal trends.
Okay. Is it bringing out traits that would lie dormant otherwise in some of us? Or is it imposing on us some other way of moving in the world?
I mean, I argue that it's in some ways on a spectrum, and all of us have a certain amount of narcissism, and we need a little bit of what we call kind of ego strength, sort of like a focus on the ego. And it gives us a bit of confidence and self-assurance. So like anything, I think it's once it becomes a little bit destructive and maladaptive, because it's, affecting how we relate to other people, how we function in the world. Those are the aspects of those traits that then would suggest something along the lines of clinical impairment or a diagnosis. So again, it's like all part of our general psychology, and to a certain greater or lesser extent, it's actually healthy to have a certain amount of ego.
Okay.
So that's what makes me think that at our core, most of us probably have it as part of our psychology, and it's partially contextual. And then, sure, it probably also, compared to the way we operated in life as kids. Well, I just remember even to be able to take a picture, you had to have a working camera with film and get it developed, which took time, energy, money, resources. And to be able to capture a moment, I think, is very appealing.
Yes, definitely. But the other element of it, needing to do it on film, you couldn't see the result and retake it, and you wouldn't be able to afford to retake it anyway. So 50 to 80% of your photos were probably not how you wanted to be looking in them.
You just take it again.
I mean, those girls on the beach would have taken thousands of photos each.
And not one of them would have had the beautiful rainbow that you captured so nicely on your video.
One question I have is, when we talk about narcissism, I think my rudimentary pop psychology is like there's some gaping hole in your sense of self. So it's sort of papered over by these exaggerated traits of self-centeredness. So my question is really like, is narcissism just the extension of insecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different theories about how it comes about, and it usually takes root in childhood, because these tend to be a little bit more long-standing traits. When we're talking about traits that are personality-based, they tend to be what we call more characterological. So they're less state-dependent, more trait-dependent. When you're experiencing, say, a low mood, sadness, or something like that, that tends to be more of a state. If it's part of your sort of internal identity structure, it's more your personality. And so they tend to be more immutable, tend to. So this is an argument in psychology about whether, folks who experience personality disorders, they have a trickier time probably getting them treated, just because it probably is a lot more intense and long-term type of treatment. And unfortunately, if you already have some of these predispositions, maybe these vulnerabilities from childhood, whether it's insecurity, whether you were treated a certain way by a parent that either built you up or cut you down too much. And so kids are very, very adaptable in that moment, and they're trying to understand, is it my parent that's wrong, or is it me? And sometimes they'll reject their parents' view that they're less than, and that kind of builds them up too much, or the opposite can be true, right? That the parent was just, you can do no wrong. And there's other ways that it can come about. But certainly abuse can also be a big portion of it, right?
So are you saying that if you've got a parent who pumps your tires up too much, then you can end up as a narcissist?
You could.
Believe the hype.
And now I'm going to go back to my psych books and look at how narcissistic personality disorder develops. And then we can talk about it a little bit more, but especially in an updated way, sort of like in the current cultural context. It's tricky with personality disorders. I think sometimes, people can sound a bit demeaning, and I don't ever mean it to be that way. I think there's a tremendous amount of pain that comes from, when they develop. And I give a lot of credit to young people who then just are continuing in a pattern in adulthood that isn't working for them anymore, but was a necessity to survive as a child.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's where the empathy for me comes in, that there's usually a lot of pain underlying that.
Yeah.
And suffering. I mean, the other thing I think that's important to bear in mind is that, culturally speaking, different cultures, like the Japanese culture and different Asian cultures, it's very, very common, and it has been for many, many years, to take lots of photos and a lot of selfies. Not necessarily, because if you think about a group of narcissists, you don't think Japanese people. In fact, they're probably very self-deprecating, at least as culturally speaking, more broadly as a theme. I don't want to go in that direction to overgeneralize.
Well, I'm just thinking of other generalizations. The covering of the mouth is when they laugh, is quite a contained thing.
Yeah.
Which is quite incongruous to the...
Well, think about just standing out. Standing out is actually probably somewhat shameful, but being part of the group and the whole is something that people strive for. So not necessarily being... And if you're a narcissist, it's like if you're not standing out, something feels wrong. If you're not put on the pedestal, it's like they're not appreciating my worth, in a way.
Okay.
And sometimes people then surround themselves with others who pump them up in part because they think, oh, well, this person really understands how special I truly am. And so they're smart, so they can be around me and pump me up. So they get a lot of what they call like narcissistic, it's like fodder.
Supply?
A lot of narcissistic supply. But if... God forbid, if you were to create some sort of injury in that person, they're not going to forget soon. And they could do like a splitting, they call it, where they initially overvalue you. Oh, this person is smart because look how they praise me and how they worship me. But if there is something that person does that is interpreted as, you're not quite living up to what it is that everybody thinks, then you could be devalued by that person. And immediately, it's like the black and white kind of thinking that can kind of come into play, which again, I think comes from a place of a lot of pain.
Okay. All right, so let's go away. We'll do some further reading. And when I say we, I mean you.
I will do reading.
And we'll reconvene.
And I will spout off. This is the spout off section, and then we'll have the
reality
genius.
So we were hypothesizing about whether Gen Z is more narcissistic than previous generations. You've gone away. You've read every single bit of literature there is on it.
I've crawled the internet and scraped it.
Scraped the hell out of that internet. And now you have every answer distilled into a very fine summary.
Yeah.
Let's start, though, with what's the actual definition of narcissism?
Yeah, so narcissism really refers to sort of a set of traits, but we're talking about a personality disorder. That's a little bit outside the normal range of personality functioning, so to speak. Whenever we're talking about a disorder, you're going to be referring to maybe someone who has a set of pervasive traits that are actually really disruptive to how they move through the world, how they function, and it can really create a lot of secondary difficulties for them.
So when we constantly throw the term narcissist around, or say that's a bit narcissistic what you're doing there, that's probably a misuse of the term.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a little bit of that background then, someone with narcissistic traits or a personality disorder is likely to, at least by the definition, it's a set of traits where there's like 9 core features, and then you actually have to have about 5 of the 9 features, or criteria, better said. So these would include things like grandiose self-importance, fantasy fixation, so almost like dreaming about success, power, brilliance, beauty, that kind of thing. So actually like engaging in fantasy. Belief in your uniqueness, that you're somehow special, potentially craving admiration, so really seeking it out, feeling a sense of entitlement, so I deserve, all of the best of everything, interpersonal exploitativeness, which is a tricky one, right? Which we could probably get into more if you want. Empathy deficit. These individuals may have more trouble really putting themselves emotionally in other people's shoes.
And to be clear, we're not talking about the people on the beach
Correct.
here. We're talking generally about the definition of a narcissist.
Right, exactly. To discriminate it from sort of, we all have maybe good days and bad, or periods where we may demonstrate these traits. Right?
I know I do.
Yeah, certainly I do. And to some extent, it might just be mentally healthy to have a good, strong sense of confidence. But then the question is, when do you tip over into it being a problem? So this is really what we're talking about in the background here. Arrogance and then envy are sort of the main features there that come out. There's now a lot more talk about how there's maybe different types, like 2 main types of narcissistic personality disorder. The grandiose type, which is sort of more described here, I think, in the criteria, and then a vulnerable type, which is thought to be maybe more of an introverted type of picture, where the person is less likely to be outgoing and maybe more neurotic, but still is very self-focused, rather than grandiose, though.
And I think, is there some element of antagonism in both traits?
Right, exactly. So where the overlap is the self-centeredness, for sure, entitlement, and there's some level of antagonism within both subtypes. Where they divide really is how extroverted or bold and feeling superior one might be, the grandiose type, versus the vulnerable type, where that person may be more, have this deep sense of shame. If, for example, this can actually occur in the same person, where, maybe the person tends to have more of a grandiose type, but then they encounter a big failure or something that, really just diminishes their sense of self-worth, and then they can fall into the more vulnerable type, where it's just like beating themselves up with shame.
Okay. And my understanding of pop psychology is the reason that tip can happen is that the grandiose narcissist at their core doesn't really hold the view that they're the best thing that's ever happened to the world. So it's like a quite precarious state. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fragility that underlies both to some extent, and certainly a lot of insecurity. The thinking is the vulnerable subtype, though, might be more insecure.
So is it possible to be a narcissist who genuinely believes you are actually the best thing that happened to the planet?
There's probably some debate on that. At its core, it's really thought to be a deep sense of insecurity.
Okay.
And the lack of empathy feels like a unifying principle as well. And that actually brings me to the next point, which is, how is it developed? And we touched on that, right? And, one of the things that I had mentioned was maybe that parenting had been brought up as one cause, or that promotes it. Whereas now it sounds like with all of the new brain imaging studies that, really look at the different parts of the brain and their functioning, and structurally how, say, thick the different parts, the gray matter, the white matter, the different parts of the brain are, that folks with this type of disorder actually have less gray matter in certain parts associated with emotional empathy. And it's called insula, the insula. Mm-hmm.
So when you say less gray matter, does that just mean that part of the brain's less developed, or what do we mean by less grey matter?
Yeah, less gray matter is really the cell bodies, the actual neuronal bodies, and then the white matter is the pathways that connect them. So if you know, like an axon actually connects the neurons to each other. And not to go into a big neuroanatomical lecture, but essentially the gray matter is that you might just have fewer cells in that region. If you're talking about less white matter, then it might be that the cells are less able to communicate with each other. Does that make sense? So both behavior can be affected by both lack of gray matter, but also problems with the different areas communicating in the brain.
Got it. Okay, so bringing that back to the question at hand, whether environmental factors like the prevalence of social media can kick off these traits. Yeah. You've mentioned that parental influence isn't as great as we previously thought.
Right. I mean, I was pretty surprised when I went back to refresh that there's a large heritability component. So what that means, it's more genetic based than we previously thought. So it probably has a lot less to do with how you were raised, whether your parents kind of pumped you up or tore you down, versus that portion of the brain maybe developing in such a way that was similar to, parents or grandparents. And so like maybe there's more of a genetic component than we previously thought.
So could you be parented perfectly? Because I think often we assume that many of the things that manifest in adulthood are from your formative years. Yeah. Could you be parented perfectly without being torn down or pumped up and still end up a narcissist?
I think the answer is yes. At least that's what this is suggesting to me, that the heritability is up to 0.64. That's relatively strong. That's on the higher end. I don't really want to go into stats, but it does suggest that independent of environment, that you inherit these traits potentially. And then there's the brain component that shows that there's these regions that are smaller than in the average individual. So again, the imaging studies are not going to tell you causality. They're not going to say this came from your parents kind of, beating you up or being abusive, or even saying you're just the best thing since sliced bread. It's unclear in terms of the causality there. So another way that they test for heritability is, okay, what can you even find like twins who basically share 100% of the same genetic material, like monozygotic twins, and were separated at birth. And they actually have data sets that have looked at whether or not, children who were separated at birth and share 100% of the genetic material end up developing same traits. And this is one way that they determined that there was a heritable component. There was a very famous Minnesota twins study. This was conducted more around the middle of the century. And apparently, I was surprised to learn this because I didn't know this. It used to be that if children were born as twins to a mother and then wanted to be adopted out, they would separate them often to ease the adoption, to facilitate adoption. Now that's, I guess, verboten. It's not done anymore. So again, these you're not going to go and separate twins at birth just to do a narcissism study. Ethically, hopefully that's a little bit questionable. So that's one way, is that they rely heavily on looking at the data. And then so that brings us back to the question of these Gen Zers, right? These young folks, and are they more likely to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder?
So, yeah, I guess, so if you're talking about heritability, you've got a genetic predisposition, there's the brain imaging that shows that it's actually physiological. The question then, I guess, is can something kick it off? So, for example, a bad childhood could kick it off, but then would having a life that's saturated with images of yourself, what anyone under 20's grown up with, which is selfie culture, can that kick off that predisposition into those traits?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, there's a well-known theory in psychology called the diathesis-stress model. And I think what you're talking about there with the kicking off is the idea that there is the underlying vulnerability, physiological, genetic, what have you, and then something triggers it. Like there's a stressor, And it could be maybe a difficult childhood, an abusive situation, a brain injury. Like there's all sorts of different potential factors that could kick it off. What it suggests is that actually we're not diagnosing people a lot more with narcissistic personality disorder. Again, that's the more severe form of the problem that people experience. But like what I want to try to be careful of is over pathologizing, like saying that basically this is something about this generation that they're more self-involved and therefore they're taking selfies more often, when it's probably at least a mix, but maybe more due to the system that they're being raised in. It's a digital culture and it's much more common for their peers. This is sort of socially their baseline. Things have just changed dramatically. So if we're looking at them through our lens from the 90s, and I guarantee you there were narcissists in the 90s and they just had a different way of exploiting others or putting themselves in front, right?
Well, they were the pioneers of holding your camera up and just turning it around.
Exactly. They were the selfie inventors, maybe.
Remember when it was cringe?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So somebody was doing it and then everybody else was judging them. And then slowly the tide changed, right?
Yeah.
Over time.
So you're basically, from what you're saying, there's nothing changing psychologically, it's culturally. So we have a culture that is more embracing of that and less embarrassed by it.
I think that's a fair way to describe it. I mean, it just makes me feel like a grandma complaining about back in our day,
The youth of today.
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, that makes sense to me now too, because of course my parents and my grandparents would judge the ways that I, live my life. We started doing email in the 90s, right? We started communicating that way in college. I remember my freshman year of college shooting emails back and forth, and my grandmother wrote these long, beautiful letters that were front and back and 10 pages long. And to her, that was just, oh my gosh, the generation of today, all they want is fast communication. And, so she was completely mortified by that.
She'd be rolling in her grave right now.
That's right. That's right. She was a very cool lady, though. Yeah.
So then statistically, we're not seeing any movement really. Mm-hmm. I want to fact check us on the questionable claims you've made about some cultures. No, it wasn't questionable. About some cultures being more sort of likely to take selfies.
Yeah, so maybe selfie oriented than others. I'm happy to take my lumps and be humble. And this is kind of what I love about this format, where we can go back and double check ourselves.
It's great, because you can say anything at the front end, just correct it at the back.
That's right. And then I've learned something.
But what did you get? So it was wrong?
Yeah. Well, so basically the idea is that alluding to the fact that certain East Asian cultures, you see them take a lot of selfies. So I was wondering, is that maybe more even prominent than in our culture, or in the U.S., for example, Australia, Spain? Is it possible that in East Asian cultures that it's even more pronounced, right? This focus on yourself. But, from digging a little bit in, it's actually maybe more of a reflection of kind of group affiliation and interdependence. Like we're together in a community, but we're taking a selfie together. So it's a little bit, it makes my brain hurt. I'm not exactly sure like how to really conceive of it, but I know it's too simplistic to say that there just tend to be more of a selfie culture.
It sounds like from what you've read, it's saying that most selfies then are group selfies.
Yeah. It's sort of suggesting that there's much more, it's much more common is the collectivist selfie.
Okay.
More sort of in a group, and group photos are not about feeding the individual ego so much as, just kind of the bringing together.
Yeah.
In community. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing that I wanted to just take a quick check on was this idea of what we call or refer to often as like splitting, which is something that actually is much more commonly described in borderline personality disorder and not so much narcissistic personality disorder. So I did want to kind of correct the record there too, simply because when you're talking about these different personality disorders.
What's splitting?
So splitting is when, you are, in the case of someone with borderline personality disorder, it tends to be this terror of like being abandoned and fear of abandonment. and then just this very unstable sense of self. So the person can either devalue the other and just really, really put them in the, you're on the shit list, or they're like or put them in the good bucket, so to speak, or then
put them in the shit list, or
put them on the shit list, or they're the best person that ever walked the face of the earth. Like, it's very black and white, and often comes from that sort of unstable sense of self and that fear of abandonment, versus a narcissistic personality disorder where also people can devalue, it's called, others. But it tends to be more so as it relates to that person and what that other person can bring to me. It seems more transactional,
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's more calculated and narcissistic. It's more about you criticize me, therefore I'm done with you, or something like that. Or you're no longer feeding me. You're not seeing my beautiful potential and how special I am.
You failed to realize
my brilliance, maybe. Or
Great. Well, that's good to clear that one up.
Yeah.
So I think we've also just blown to pieces my theory which I still can't quite believe.
Yeah.
That there wouldn't be some greater observation of those traits, but there we go.
Well, and honestly, I think maybe both things are true. When I'm talking about narcissism in the personality disorder context, that's again more of the extreme.
Right. So it could be more, we could be seeing more evidence of those traits without it being a personality disorder.
100%. That's possible.
Okay.
You might need to do the sociological deep dive, in which case.
Yeah, that's for another day.
That's another day.
So the funny thing about being a brand new podcast is that you have to get really beggy at the end.
Yeah, it's kind of cringe. Regardless, we're going to beg.
If you have made it all the way to the end of this conversation, you might like to subscribe. We are Untethered. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed it, please rate it. Don't rate it if you hate it.
Don't rate it if you hate it. If you love it, though,
shove it. No,
don't shove it.
Don't shove it. So, but it does help other people find the podcast, obviously. You can find references in the show note. This discussion is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Serana is a clinical psychologist, but this podcast is not a substitute for professional clinical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And if you're experiencing mental health struggles, please reach out to a licensed professional. We are Michelle and Serana. Have an untethered week, and we'll catch you next time.